So that, $500,000 house is now going to cost you $600,000 to build. That's just going to be the new normal.
Welcome to Building Perspective, the Master Builders SA podcast. I'm your host, Will Frogley. Join me as I speak with some characters in the building and construction industry.
Master Builders Insurance Brokers is where the building and construction industry goes for specialist advice. We know the right insurance cover is essential to the success of builders of all sizes. And we're here to help you understand, select and manage the right cover for your business. How do you know you've got the right cover? You trust the industry specialists.
There's a multitude of obstacles for people to navigate in the building construction industry at the moment, and someone who's very well placed to give some great advice on how to do exactly that is Paul Dimasi, who's a partner at Nexia Edwards Marshall. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having us. And you're quite right. There is a lot going on in the building game, and in particular, your financial welfare is one of them. So it's definitely been some interesting times over the last couple of years, and I think there's some interesting times to come.
And you're a repeat guest on the Building Perspective podcast. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me back. This is the second crack at it, so hopefully a bit more polished, bit better at it. But it's fun and enjoyable. So no, thank you for the opportunity.
Good stuff. Now, can you just remind our viewers what exactly Nexia Edwards Marshall does and some of the services they provide?
Yep. So Nexia Edwards Marshall is a chartered accounting firm. So we specialise in taxation, business services, audit, superannuation, and financial planning. And probably what sets us aside is that we have a few specialty industry groups, one of them being property and construction, which I chair. And we obviously sponsor and partner with the MBA to provide specific advice for the members and our clients in that area. So yeah, we're just a full suite accounting firm, but some of us in my group in particular have a strong passion for the property and construction industry.
Yeah, fantastic. It is a very busy time, but it's also a very challenging time. And people I speak to in the industry who have been involved for 30, 40 years say they've never seen anything like what we're dealing with right now. It's extremely busy, but it's been called the profitless boom. And I think for the majority of people, that's a pretty accurate summary, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty consistent with what we're hearing from a lot of our clients. A lot of them have built up war chests over a number of years, and unfortunately, the last 18 months, even though there's been a lot of work on, we're seeing those war chests dwindle, prices rise and all of that. So it's definitely a combination of a lot of stress and additional factors out there that are causing them to rethink and potentially look at some of these topics we're going to discuss today.
We've certainly seen a very significant number of insolvencies in our industry around the country. We haven't seen that in South Australia yet. Now, we're all hoping it doesn't happen. What is causing those insolvencies around the country?
So there's a multitude of forces that are acting on all of this. So in particular with the building game, there's material increases, but not only is the cost of the price increasing, there's the delay in delivery. Also with the delivery, the price of the freight has gone up too. So that's just one factor. Then you've got subcontractors, their price is going up, but also the availability is decreased because people are exiting the game or there's just no labour around. Then you've got obviously the banks and the interest rate rises. So that's decreasing people's borrowing capacity, which stops them from being able to pay the builders. And then there's, government delays, approvals, getting all your finances in place. Everything is sort of stacking up. So you start adding all these forces together, you can see that it's causing a lot of pain for the builders. And realistically, who's wearing that cost at the end of the day? Well, they are trying to pass some of that on with rise and fall contracts to the end user, but the clients are then pushing back saying, well, we can't really afford this increase. So they might shop around or pull out of contracts. You can't squeeze your subcontractors any tighter, even though they probably try to already. They're already running at the limits as well. Banks aren't going to give away any more money because they've got APRA on their back. They look at the property prices and your affordability, whether you can service the debt. So, you start adding all of these forces together, it's quite easy to see why builders are starting to tighten up and feel the pinch. In particular, with the big boom in the JobKeeper and the first home builders and all the grants that were given out over the past 2 years, that pipeline of work is just sort of, it's really just turned into a bit of an avalanche, realistically. Like it started off small, but it's building up to this bigger and bigger problem that is going to come to an end in the next 6 to 12 months.
It's taken, I think, people outside our industry quite a long time to get their heads around it, because just because a building industry is very busy, it certainly doesn't mean people are making a lot of money. But if you drove past a restaurant, and at all hours of the day it was packed out and there were huge lineups to get in and things like that, there'd be a very low chance that they'd be going broke. But building's quite different, isn't it? And we've had the cost of building for materials has gone up at the highest rate we've seen in more than 40 years. And there's a huge problem still of just getting enough people to actually deliver the work. It's a massive problem for all the members that I'm speaking to.
Yeah. So back in July, there was an article released showing a cross-section of a house and how much all the products went up. And it showed that steel was up 40%, timber was up around 20%. Ceramics were up about 15%, and it went through all the materials that go into building a residential house, and it averaged to about a 20% increase overall. Add that in with a fixed price contract, which a lot of our builders had back then. All of a sudden, that 10%, 15% gross profit margin that they had on these contracts was gone, plus it was digging into their war chest. So it's quite easy to see that there's that impact. Yes, they look busy because availability is not there and there's a lot of work going on, but that client, the owner at the end of the day, probably doesn't realise what's happened with the increase in prices along the way and the delays. Even though it's in the media and the news, you sort of only just think about, well, I don't want to pay the extra, but you don't think about the flow-on effect that's happening to the builders and their subcontractors and the suppliers and the bankers. So yeah, it's quite easy to see how this has snowballed into a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a hard time for builders and subcontractors to price jobs, because particularly if there's quite a long time between when they tender and when they actually get to site, it's the prices could have really escalated during that time period alone. And I think something NBA's been doing to really try and support the industry through what is a very tricky time is to get rise and fall clauses in state government contracts with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. And we've been very pleased to get that in. So that applies to all Department of Infrastructure and Transport contracts signed after 1st of January, which is a really important thing for the industry and is protecting the builder and subcontractor from a very risky environment.
Yeah, and that's fantastic that the rise and fall clauses are now included. And it's just like anything, it's being open and honest with the end user to just explain, okay, well, here's the evidence to show that my costs have increased by X percentage. This is why we're passing it on. Whereas sometimes that step might be forgotten and you just pass on the cost without explaining it. And that's where I guess the tension in the industry is caused as well. But, there's a lot of other things that the builders in particular need to look at as well, making sure that they're not sort of just being complacent with their systems that they have in place, so that they are adjusting for these price increases. They're looking back at how long it takes to, build some of the framework or how many hours you need out on site, building in a bit of a leeway there just to make sure that when they are quoting as well, that they're not just thinking, all right, 10 years ago, the 10, 15% profit margin worked. We actually need to, keep making sure we're on track and covering our costs and not wearing that at the end of the day. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to pay the bills.
Communication, which you hinted at there, is really important. And that's certainly something Master Builders has been trying to convey to South Australians, is that there's so many factors outside of builders' control at the moment. And there's most people who are building want to move in as soon as possible. But there's no builder out there who wants a job to take much longer than they forecast, because time's really money in our industry, isn't it? The longer it takes to build, the less that's going to be left over for the builder at the end of the day.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes back to not being able to separate the emotion from the business side of the decisions. So it is an emotional time to build a house and want to get in there and you get excited to do all of that. But some things are outside of your control, in particular with price rises and the delays. So being open and honest and communicating that between the builder and the client can save a lot of tension in the long run, because, if they pull out of a contract, they have to go to another builder and they're probably just going to face the same hurdles. Prices are still increased for everybody. It's not just one builder being greedy. It's an industry-wide issue that we can see. And it's not just South Australia, it's Australia-wide. Well, it's worldwide. But.
Speaking of widespread issues, that skill shortage we were talking about, it seems that no matter who you speak to, regardless of the industry, they're just crying out for people. They just can't get them.
Oh, yeah, spot on. We're in the same boat as everybody else. The beauty about being in the business services division of my firm is we get to see a lot of clients from different industries, not just the building and construction game. And it's the same problem out there. Interview one day, person's rejected because they've had multiple offers from elsewhere. It's definitely an employee market at the moment. They can demand a bit more flexibility, a bit more money and perks and all of that. So, that's putting a bit of a stranglehold on the market. So things like, when immigration numbers start to improve and pick up, hopefully that'll fix some of the shortfall in the employee game too.
The shortages were so dire in our industry that we obviously skilled migration's a very important piece. Also training people, getting them through the system, but that takes a lot longer. I mean, we were so desperate. We were looking at, can we tap into, pensioners and veterans and that type of demographic, because currently the way the tax system's set up, it's really hard for them to do work where they could. So I think it's with pensioners and veterans, I think they $490 a fortnight for every dollar they earn over that. They lose 50 cents for every dollar out of their pension, and not only that, they get taxed 19%. So they're effectively paying a 69% tax rate. Now, no wonder only 3% of pensioners work in Australia compared with, I think it's about 25% in New Zealand, right? Yeah,
well, when you start talking numbers like that, you can see why it's attractive to stay home and do nothing. But realistically, it needs a bit of a rethink, and just like we're discussing before, you can redeploy some of the elderly into other roles that aren't so labour intensive, and that might then increase some of the younger players in the game to maybe not take that office role and go try being a brickie or a concreter or a labourer or something like that. So there are, strategies that can be looked at, and I know they're bringing back some of the TAFE in education for skilled labour. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out as well in the next few years.
Yeah, good points. When we called for that publicly, we were pretty realistic in that we weren't going to get an army of 75-year-old brickies or concreters to suddenly fill those gaps. But we definitely thought it could be useful for a lot of other industries. And as you said, there are still a lot of jobs in building construction, which are office-based, etc. So, but that did seem like a sizable pool of people we could tap into. I think there are about 500,000 job vacancies in Australia at the moment, which is pretty incredible. If you tapped into, anything like New Zealand's rate, you could make a pretty big dent in that figure. But then also we need that skilled migration back, don't we? That's so important.
Yeah, it'll make it'll be a game changer once that happens. And, we're seeing a lot of fatigue and stress from the last couple of years. So hopefully people will be able to start enjoying some annual leave and taking some time off and refreshing, and then just getting back to normal. At the moment, everyone's sort of on edge and thinking, a lot of clients that we're seeing, especially some of the older builders, are thinking, well, once I finish up what I'm doing, I'm going to leave the industry. They've had enough, and that they don't want to go down that path of potentially losing out. And the flip side is that provides opportunities. That provides the opportunities for skilled labour to come in, or skilled migration to come in, or some of the younger players who are coming out of school, or apprentices who are finishing their last year to, have a crack and set up their own business and fill the void that these older players are going to leave when they exit the industry.
So do you have a prediction about when these kind of skill shortages or price increases of materials is likely to settle down?
Skills shortages, I'm thinking probably mid-2023, end of 2023. But, this is just my opinion. The pricing, I think, is going to settle probably towards the end of this year, start of next calendar year. But then again, you're not going to see it drop. So realistically, it's just setting a new norm. And from some of the stats I saw, it's about a 20% average increase. So that, $500,000 house is now going to cost you $600,000 to build. That's just going to be the new normal going forward.
So I think the volatility is going to continue for quite a while. What are some of the things that builders and other people in the industry need to do now to really protect themselves and minimise that risk?
So there's a few things that can be done, and hopefully, they've sought some advice in the past and have a correct structure. But that's probably one of the main things that we're talking to our clients about. I'm going to be the first to admit it. Accounting's not always the sexiest subject to talk about. But the thing is, you can look at it as an asset in your business going forward. If you get that structure right now, it is going to pay dividends in the long run tenfold over, because you're going to have extra asset protection. So, there are liquidations going on in the game. And if you are unfortunately part of that, if you've structured it correctly, hopefully all your personal assets are safe in somebody else's name and it's only the business up for grabs. There's tax benefits. Everybody loves to talk about tax benefits, and getting the right structure can save you thousands in tax using beneficiary distributions or corporate tax rates or just a combination of those. The right structure can facilitate things like generational wealth transfer, bringing on that next generation to take over the business. And it can also help you exit the business correctly. You can access small business concessions, other capital gains concessions that will help you keep as much in your pocket as possible instead of giving it away to the ATO when you sell up in taxes effectively. So yeah, it's not the easiest topic to talk about, but if you can simplify it and get it right from the outset, it's going to, be a huge benefit for so many people in the long run. And just saying that, it's not set and forget either. So just because you're currently in a structure now, it doesn't mean you can't roll over into something new. And it's just something to always talk to your advisor about to make sure that the structure you have now is still appropriate, or whether it needs to change, because you might have an exit strategy for 5 years' time, but you might need to actually start that now in terms of looking at your structure and making sure it's still set up right. Because ultimately you don't want to be taxed when you sell up and lose all that wealth you've worked for, and particularly if you haven't put away for super either. So structuring and getting that right now can definitely help, not only for asset protection, tax flexibility, distribution flexibility. There's so much involved in it that it's just going to do wonders for your business if you get it right up front.
So definitely some good advice there, Paul. We know that the industry's been very busy and the property market's been very strong in South Australia over the past 2 years. Where do you see both going in, the short term, the medium term and the long term?
So I've got a few stats in front of me from the guys over at Smartline, and Adelaide forecast to the end of this calendar year is still predicted to have a 2 and 5% increase, even though we know there's been the first month of drops. This is looking at the yearly stats. The forecast for December 23 is about a 3 to 6% decline in South Australia. Now, if you look at the national stats though, December 22, there's a forecast of a drop of 2 to 5%. And then December 23, it's a drop of 7 to 10%. So South Australia, earlier on, we didn't have as such strong price rises as the Eastern Seaboard. So we've sort of been able to wear this quite well. So realistically, property prices are probably going to stabilise where they are. And in some suburbs, we are going to see probably up to a 6 to 10% drop. But, the average in South Australia should be 3 to 6% by the end of 2023.
6 to 10% drop is have you got a feel of what kind of regions they might be in?
No, it's South Australia's a bit unique. If you draw like a 10-kilometre radius around Adelaide, you're sort of in a bit of a safe zone, and it's anything that falls within, that 15 to 20k radius out, depending on what the work economic climate's like. So that's probably where you're going to see a bit more of the fall. But realistically, I think, it's Adelaide or South Australia is still a very attractive investment market for the Eastern Seaboard players. So there's still a lot of demand and price coming through.
We're certainly still a lot more affordable here than in other places, aren't we?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So our median price, I think, is still 200,000 or 300,000 below Victoria and 300,000 below Sydney. So yeah, definitely more affordable at this stage.
Turning to another issue, there was a pretty significant High Court ruling recently regarding contractors, weren't there?
Yeah, there was. So this is an interesting one, and it's potentially a game changer. So it'll be a space to watch for sure. So, advisors probably aren't going to change their advice yet, but in the near future it might. And the interesting thing is, in particular, it's rife in the building game. At the moment, when you're dealing with subcontractors, you're looking at all these different tests, whether they provide their own plant and equipment, whether they getting paid on an hourly rate, weekly rate, or upon completion of the job, who's liable to fix defects, can they then on charge or use other subcontractors and delegate the work as they please. So that's sort of what the ATO and the courts look at now to determine whether you're a contractor or an employee. And the flip side is if you are deemed an employee, then the builder has to pay potentially superannuation, leave entitlements, work cover and all of that. So it becomes more expensive. And what we've seen in the last few years are these subcontractors coming back and saying, you know what, actually I was an employee and I want that super back paid, and that's caused a bit of an issue. But in this recent High Court case, they've ruled that because there was an actual contract in place, regardless of what's happened in terms of those tests that we talked about earlier, the contract rules. And, they've been deemed contractors, not employees. And that's going to be pretty interesting to see if it can actually be challenged or changed. But if that does come in, it's sort of beneficial for both parties. If you want to be a contractor, you don't need to sort of worry about passing all those tests, and it's just as simple as engaging in a contract. And from the builder or the employer's perspective, it gives them a little bit more flexibility that they don't need to worry about potentially having to pay super and work cover and all the on costs, and that they can sort of use a contractor for what they are, to come on to fix, high demand times of work, or to fill a void when people are taking leave, and not have to worry about the compliance and ongoing costs with an employee. So it'll be an interesting watch this space, that's for sure.
You've covered a lot of very interesting subjects today, Paul. Yeah. I guess, what would be your number one tip to, someone working in our industry right now?
Right now, it's if you can dig deep and hold on, I think revisit your things like your cash flow forecasts and your budgeting. Make sure that you're not selling yourself short. Pass on the costs where you can, openly communicate, and be able to provide, the great services and the great services that you're currently doing. But, things will get better. I think with all of these threats that are coming in place, it also provides opportunities. So, there will be people falling over and coming out of the game, but that just, provides further opportunities for young players to come up, or the ones to survive to continue to do such a great job as well.
Well, Paul, I'd like to thank you very much for coming in today. Very interesting discussion, and I'd like to thank you as well for your continued support of Master Builders. It's greatly appreciated, and I look forward to hearing more about your outlook and advice going forward. It's been very useful, so thanks very much.
No worries at all, Will. It's always a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me on Building Perspective. For more information on Master Builders or our guests, please visit our website at mbasa.com.au.